When a royal jewel goes to auction, it means something went very wrong, and the story behind the sale is almost always sadder than the price. These weren't willing sellers. They were exiled monarchs, stripped of everything but the contents of a jewelry box. They were grieving widows, racing to outrun bankruptcy. They were children, sorting through a dead parent's belongings with a tax bill on the table. The jewels survived. The dynasties, the marriages, the lives that created them. Those didn't. This is the countdown of 20 royal and aristocratic jewels that reached the auction block, and the stories of collapse that put them there. Number 20. In December 1793, Madame du Barry, the last official mistress of Louis XV, a woman who had been draped in royal diamonds for 20 years, was dragged to the guillotine. She was the only condemned person at the Place de la Révolution that day who wept and begged. She delayed her execution for nearly 4 hours by promising, one revelation at a time, to tell her captors where she had hidden her jewels. She knew exactly what she was doing. Each confession bought her another hour of life. It didn't save her. But in February 1795, Christie's in London auctioned 65 lots of her confiscated jewelry, 1,000 pearls and 150 large diamonds among them, raising approximately £8,788, far below their appraised value. The first great royal jewel sale in the auction house's history had been financed with a woman's final minutes. Number 19. Napoleon Bonaparte gave Josephine de Beauharnais an engagement ring in 1796, a simple gold band set with a pear-shaped sapphire and a pear-shaped diamond, touching at their tips. Neither stone was enormous. The ring was intimate rather than imperial. After their divorce in 1810, Napoleon needed an heir and Josephine couldn't provide one. She kept it. It passed down through her descendants, surfacing and disappearing through various private collections over 2 centuries. In March 2013, the auction house Ocenat sold it in Fontainebleau, the town where Josephine had received Napoleon's letter of divorce. The estimate was between $13,000 and $20,000. It sold for $949,000, nearly 50 times over. The bidders weren't paying for the sapphire. They were paying for the marriage, for the letter, for the fact that she wore this ring until the day he sent her away. Number 18. Empress Eugenie was the last empress of France, wife of Napoleon III, and one of the most magnificently jeweled women in European history. She escaped Paris in 1870 during the Franco-Prussian War, reportedly fleeing through the Louvre and climbing into a cab in the street. She got out with her personal jewels. The French state got nothing of hers. By 1872, in English exile, the family found themselves short of cash, and she consigned her private collection to Christie's in London. The centerpiece was a 51-carat diamond known as the Eugenie diamond, which sold to the Maharaja of Baroda for the equivalent of £12,000. She lived until 1920, dying at 94 in a rented house in Spain, outliving her husband, her son, and her empire by decades. The emeralds she'd hidden in a fan she bequeathed to her goddaughter, Queen Victoria Eugenie of Spain, who sold those in turn in 1961 at the Stuker auction house in Bern, to pay for her grandson Juan Carlos's wedding. One empress's exile funds another queen's celebrations 60 years later. Number 17. When the French Third Republic decided in 1882 to liquidate the French crown jewels, the parliamentary vote was 342 to 85. The argument was practical and ruthless. Without a crown, there can't be a king. If the gems existed, royalists could theoretically sell them to finance a coup. Better to disperse them into private hands across the globe, where no one cause could gather them again. The law was signed in December 1886. 9 auction sessions ran from May 12th to May 23rd, 1887, inside the Louvre itself. The diadems were dismantled, the crowns were stripped of their stones. Pieces that had been worn at the coronations of French kings for centuries were unscrewed and sold as components. Charles Tiffany of Tiffany & Company attended personally, purchasing approximately 24 lots, roughly a third of what's sold, and returned to New York to display them in custom leather cases embossed with royal coats of arms. That exhibition is credited with transforming Tiffany's from a jewelry shop into the luxury institution it became. The total raised was 7,221,560 francs, against an appraised value of 8 million. Critics called it historical vandalism at the time. The Regent Diamond, a 140-carat stone representing roughly half the collection's value on its own, was kept back. The crown of Louis XV had its precious stones replaced with glass before being put in a museum case. France has spent the decades since slowly, expensively buying pieces back. It isn't an active campaign. It's a slow, incredibly expensive waiting game to undo a single parliamentary morning's work. Number 16. The Grand Mazarin diamond was one of 18 stones personally selected by Cardinal Mazarin in the 17th century and bequeathed to the French crown. By 1887, it sat in that same sale at the Louvre, a 19.07-carat fancy light pink diamond sold to the jeweler Boucheron for 101,000 francs. It passed to a Russian royal collector, then vanished into private hands for 130 years. In 2017, it surfaced at Christie's Geneva and sold to an undisclosed buyer for $14.46 million. A cardinal's bequest, a republic's disposal, a century of silence. Number 15. The Vladimir tiara was made for Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, wife of Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, uncle of Tsar Nicholas II, and the most powerful non-imperial woman in St. Petersburg. The tiara was a ring of 15 diamond-set circles, each with a drop pendant. Originally hung with pearls, later adapted to hold Cambridge emeralds. It was one piece in a jewelry collection so vast, it was catalogued after the Revolution in 4 volumes by a Soviet government professor. Maria Pavlovna fled Russia in 1919 and died the following year in France. Her daughter, Grand Duchess Elena Vladimirovna, inherited the tiara and brought it into exile in Greece. By 1921, in desperate need of funds, Elena sold it to Queen Mary for £28,000. It has been in the British royal collection ever since, worn by Queen Elizabeth II at dozens of state occasions, and now by the Princess of Wales. The original owner's granddaughter died in a bedsit. The tiara lives in a palace. Number 14. The story of how Maria Pavlovna's broader collection left Russia is one of the most dramatic retrievals in the history of jewels. On September 26, 1917, a British diplomat and antique dealer named Albert Stopford, possibly operating as an intelligence agent, disguised himself as a workman and gained entry to the empty Vladimir Palace through a side door, with help from the Grand Duchess's son Boris and a trusted servant. He located the secret safe in Maria Pavlovna's bedroom, removed 244 pieces of jewelry, folded them in old newspaper for protection, and placed them in a Gladstone bag. He left Russia via Scandinavia, depositing the entire cash in a London bank. A separate batch, approximately 60 items sent through the Swedish mission in November 1918, only discovered in Swedish Foreign Ministry archives in 2009, arrived through different channels entirely. Maria Pavlovna never saw most of those pieces again. Her son Boris sold her emeralds to Cartier, using the proceeds to buy a house near Paris. Cartier reset the stones for American clients. Pieces that had been worn at imperial balls were broken apart and reset for the wives of industrialists. Cartier's Pierre Cartier told the New York Times in 1922, holding one of the Catherine the Great pieces, "I can't escape a certain feeling of sadness at the thought that this historic work must be destroyed, and the stones parted with singly." Number 13. In March 1927, Christie's London held a sale of 124 lots of Russian imperial jewels, not smuggled, not rescued, sold openly by the Soviet People's Commissariat of Finance, which had confiscated everything following the Revolution. Imperial wedding crowns, diamond diadems, jewels from Catherine the Great. The total raised was approximately £400,000. The Bolshevik government used the proceeds. Between 1927 and 1936, Soviet authorities sold 569 of the 773 items originally catalogued in the Diamond Fund. The Romanov dynasty's treasures weren't merely dispersed, they were liquidated as assets by the government that had murdered the family. Number 12. Dowager Empress Maria Fyodorovna, mother of Tsar Nicholas II, widow of Alexander III, was Danish by birth and got out of Russia alive. She refused until her dying day to believe that Nicholas and his family had been killed. She died in Denmark in October 1928, still waiting. Her jewels were sealed and sent via diplomatic courier to Buckingham Palace, where her daughters, Xenia and Olga, selected pieces to keep. The rest were sold, with Queen Mary purchasing multiple items that now remain in the British royal collection. The woman who had been Empress of all the Russias left an estate distributed at a family sorting session in a palace corridor. Number 11. King Constantine II of Greece was deposed following a 1974 referendum that abolished the Greek monarchy. He went into exile in London with his family, and over the following decades, the royal household accumulated objects, furniture, silver, paintings, jewelry, that had been their personal property before the Republic was proclaimed. On January 24, 2007, Christie's London put more than 850 of those objects up for auction. The Greek culture minister formally objected, claiming items may have been illegally exported. Christie's proceeded regardless. The Greek government protested. The sale happened. What had been the contents of a royal home became lot numbers. Constantine got the money. Greece got the argument. Number 10. In 1961, at the Stuker Auction House in Bern, Queen Victoria Eugenie of Spain, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, former Queen of Spain, living in Swiss exile, sold 3 pieces from Empress Eugenie's emerald collection: a necklace, a brooch, a ring. The reason? To contribute to the wedding costs of her grandson, Prince Juan Carlos. Cartier purchased all 3 pieces and resold them to the Shah of Iran, who gave them to Empress Farah Pahlavi. The emeralds had made their way from a deposed French empress through a deposed Spanish queen to a soon-to-be deposed Iranian empress. All 3 women who wore those stones lost their thrones. Number 9. Princess Gloria von Thurn und Taxis married Prince Johannes, 34 years her senior, heir to one of Europe's oldest aristocratic fortunes, in 1980. The Thurn und Taxis family had built their wealth on running the Holy Roman Empire's postal system for 3 centuries and had held it through everything. Johannes died in December 1990, leaving Gloria, aged 30, with debts of $500 million. The interest alone was running at $130,000 per day. She sold a bank in June 1992. She sold breweries. She taught herself finance and accounting in the years between asset sales. And on November 17, 1992, Sotheby's Geneva auctioned the Thurn und Taxis jewelry collection: snuff boxes, silver, and pieces that included Empress Eugenie's own pearl and diamond tiara, which the family had purchased when it came up from the 1887 French crown jewels sale. That tiara was bought at the 1992 auction by the Amis du Louvre and returned to France. A piece of French imperial heritage making its way home a century late, via a German aristocrat's bankruptcy. The 1992 Sotheby's sale raised approximately $14 million. Gloria kept the castle, St. Emmeram Palace in Regensburg, 500 rooms, the largest privately inhabited castle in Germany. She kept it by selling everything else. Number 8. The Wittelsbach diamond is 35.56 carats, fancy deep grayish blue, mined at the Kollur mines in Golconda, India, the same source that produced the Hope diamond and the Koh-i-Noor. It came to Bavaria in 1722 as part of a Habsburg dowry and sat atop the Bavarian royal crown for nearly 2 centuries. Its last public appearance in its proper context was at the funeral of King Ludwig III in 1921. With the proclamation of the Bavarian Republic in 1918, all Wittelsbach possessions had been placed under state control. In 1931, the Bavarian government gave the family permission to sell 13 items from the crown jewels to relieve their financial distress. The diamond was listed first in Christie's catalog. The hammer fell at £5,400 to a buyer named Thorpe. And then, the diamond vanished. It didn't return to Munich. For 20 years, its whereabouts were unknown. It surfaced briefly at the 1958 World Exhibition in Brussels, displayed anonymously, its true identity unrecognized. A Belgian diamond cutter named Joseph Komkommer finally identified it in 1962, refused to cut it, and organized a consortium to purchase and preserve it. In December 2008, Christie's London sold the Wittelsbach diamond to Lawrence Graff for $24,262,008, a world record for any diamond at that point. Graff had it recut by 3 cutters, reducing it from 35.56 to 31.06 carats, upgraded its clarity to internally flawless, and renamed it the Wittelsbach Graff. Diamond cutter Gabriel Tolkowski called it the end of culture. Professor Hans Ottemeyer compared it to overpainting a Rembrandt. The Depression-era auction had failed to find a buyer wealthy enough to take it. 77 years later, it found one, who promptly altered the thing that made it irreplaceable. Number 7. Napoleon's engagement ring to Josephine is number 19. The story of what happened to Josephine's larger jewel collection after her death in 1814 is a quieter sadness. Her children and grandchildren dispersed it across the royal houses of Europe through inheritance and marriage. Individual pieces resurfaced at auction throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, each one trailing the story of a woman who was empress for 5 years and then discarded. The March 2013 Fontainebleau sale of the engagement ring is the sharpest ending. Sold in the town where she received the divorce letter for 49 times its high estimate. Sentiment, properly documented, is apparently worth $929,000 more than the stones. Number 6. Queen Victoria Eugenie of Spain sat out her exile in Lausanne after the Spanish Republic was declared in 1931 and the family left Madrid. Her personal jewel collection had been substantial. Gifts from her grandmother, Queen Victoria, from her husband, Alfonso XIII, from the Spanish court. Piece by piece, as the exile stretched into decades, she sold what she had. The 1961 emerald sale wasn't desperation. She had managed. But the fact that a former queen was funding a royal wedding from auction proceeds, rather than from royal coffers, captures something precise about the mechanics of exile. The dynasty continues. The wealth does not. Number 5. On April 2nd and 3rd, 1987, Sotheby's Geneva sold 306 lots, 214 pieces of jewelry, from the collection of the Duchess of Windsor. Total raised, $50.3 million, against a conservative pre-sale estimate of $7 million. 7 times over. Wallis Simpson's collection wasn't merely beautiful, it was a record of her marriage. The Duke of Windsor had commissioned each piece to mark a moment, an inscription, a date, a private message engraved on the back. His engagement present was a Cartier emerald of 19.77 carats, engraved, "We are ours now, 26 by 36. He gave her a Van Cleef & Arpels bracelet while the abdication was still happening, ordered as a Christmas gift during the week he was renouncing the throne. The jewels were, as described at the time, a portable biography of a love story that cost Britain its king. Wallis died in Paris in April 1986. Her will directed that all proceeds from the sale go to the Institut Pasteur. The phone lines ran for hours. The panther bracelet Cartier had made for her sold for multiples of its estimate. Everything sold. Not a single lot failed to find a buyer. Edward had reportedly wanted the jewels dismantled after her death so no other woman could wear them. The instruction, if he gave it, wasn't honored. Instead, 214 pieces that had been assembled as acts of romantic compensation, given to a woman in exchange for a crown that a country never forgave her for, went to strangers. The Institut Pasteur received the money. The love story, such as it was auctioned off by the lot. Number 4. In January 1959, Princess Margaret paid £5,500 for the Poltimore tiara, a mid-Victorian diamond bandeau tiara made by Gerard in 1870 for Lady Poltimore. It wasn't an official royal jewel. It was hers, personally purchased, personally paid for. She wore it at her wedding to Anthony Armstrong Jones on May 6, 1960. The first royal wedding broadcast on television, watched by 300 million people. Her husband photographed her wearing it in a bath at Kensington Palace in 1962. It appeared in her official portraits. It was, of everything she owned, the most recognizably hers. Margaret died in February 2002. Her estate was valued at £7.6 million. At 40% inheritance tax, her children, Lord Linley and Lady Sarah Chatto, faced a bill of approximately £3 million. On June 13th and 14th, 2006, Christie's London auctioned 800 items from her estate, including approximately 192 pieces of jewellery. Every single lot sold. Total? $25,104,742. The Poltimore tiara went to a private Asian buyer for £926,400, roughly 168 times what Margaret had paid for it in 1959. Lord Linley later told reporters that when people die, taxes need to be paid. That's true. It's also true that the tiara she wore to her wedding was sold because the British state required it. Its current whereabouts are private. It hasn't been seen publicly since the auction. Number 3. Before Marie Antoinette was imprisoned in the Tuileries in 1791, she had time to act. She carefully wrapped her pearls, diamonds, and rubies in cotton, placed them in a wooden chest, and sent them via diplomatic courier to Brussels, forwarded from there to Vienna, to her nephew, the Austrian Emperor. The jewels were restored to her daughter Marie-Thérèse on her release in 1795. From there, they passed through the Bourbon-Parma family line for more than 2 centuries, kept private, kept intact, kept out of auction rooms. On November 14, 2018, Sotheby's Geneva offered 100 lots from the Bourbon-Parma collection. The pre-sale high estimate for the entire sale was 7 million Swiss francs. Total raised, 53.5 million Swiss francs. more than 7 times over. The centerpiece was a natural pearl and diamond pendant that Marie Antoinette herself had worn. It sold for 36,427,000 Swiss francs, $36.1 million, a world auction record for a natural pearl. The buyer was anonymous. A pearl she had owned, wrapped in cotton and smuggled from a palace she would never re-enter, sold 225 years after her execution for $36 million. The Bourbon-Parma family consigned the collection following the death of Infanta Alicia, Duchess of Calabria, in 2017. The estate required division among heirs. The jewels were the liquid assets. They always are at the end. Number 2. Maria Pavlovna's individual pieces, sold off through the 1920s and 1930s as the Romanov exiles aged and funds depleted, represent one of history's longest and quietest liquidations. Not a single dramatic auction, just steady, grinding necessity. Albert Stopford had carried 244 pieces out in a Gladstone bag. Boris sold the emeralds. Elena sold the Vladimir tiara to Queen Mary for £28,000, a transaction that was dignified and devastating in equal measure. Other pieces went to Cartier, who dismantled them. Cartier's Pierre Cartier had described the process with genuine sorrow, breaking apart stones that had been worn at imperial court ceremonies, resetting them for American clients who had no connection to what the pieces had been. The money kept the exiles alive. The objects ceased to exist in any form the people who had owned them would have recognized. Maria Pavlovna herself never saw the outcome. She died in France in 1920, a year after fleeing Russia, before the full extent of the sales had unfolded. Her collection, a 100-carat emerald from Catherine the Great, a 5-carat ruby once owned by Josephine de Beauharnais, 244 pieces removed in a single night from a palace that would never again open for a ball, was already in a London bank vault. She died without it. Her children spent it. Number 1. The most heartbreaking royal jewels ever sold at auction aren't any single piece. They are a pattern. And the pattern ends here. In May 1887, a government dismantled its own inheritance for fear of what the gems might fund. In 1931, a diamond worth millions sat unsold in a Depression-era auction room because the world was too broke to buy it, while the family it belonged to went without. In 1987, 214 pieces engraved with private messages between a king who gave up his throne and the woman the world never forgave were auctioned to strangers for $50 million. In 2006, a princess's wedding tiara was sold to pay a tax bill. In 2018, a pearl wrapped in cotton by a woman on her way to prison sold for $36 million 2 centuries later. The objects endure. The Wittelsbach diamond sits in a private vault, recut, renamed. The Vladimir tiara is worn at state banquets. Marie Antoinette's pearl is in a collection no one publicly names. The Baltimore tiara hasn't been seen since 2006. The French crown jewels, what's left of them, are behind glass in the Louvre, stripped of their original stones. The dynasties that created them are gone. The families that inherited them sold the last of what they had. The jewels survive as the only proof that any of it existed. An empire, a marriage, a love story, a life. Every one of them reached an auction block because everything else was already lost. When a royal jewel goes to auction, the real loss was never the price. Subscribe for more stories like this.